So many questions have been raised about life after death, about what happens once we cross over to the other side. Some even doubt the justice of God when we look at our world that is filled with pain and apparent injustice. How can these differences be explained? We cannot accept that things happen by chance, or that we have good or bad luck, or that God would have picked some to have a better life than others. What is the logic behind the facts of life we see every day?
Let's welcome our next speaker for their second talk, entitled Logic of Reincarnation in Spiritism, brought to us by Edward Christie. Edward Christie has been involved with Spiritism for more than 20 years and is an active member of both SGNY and IESS. Edward is a classically trained pianist, has taught music in New York schools as well as computer science courses at NYU. He enjoys learning and uses his love of teaching to share his knowledge with others. Please welcome Edward Christie.
I want to ask you 3 questions. If you believe in reincarnation, please raise your hand. If you're at home, raise your hand. It'll still come through. Well, you're going to make my job easy here. If you believe, did it make sense to you from the very first time you heard it? Please raise your hand. If you believe, has it made a difference in how you live your life? Please raise your hand. I'm glad to be in such good company. Humans are always asking questions. Science categorizes us as Homo sapiens, wise or rational man, but we might just as rightly be called Homo curiosum, inquisitive man. We're curious because we're creatures who seek answers. We ask questions because we have doubts about ourselves and what we're doing here. Some questions are so persistent that we have to hold answers even if those answers lack factual certainty. Yet how we value an answer makes all the difference. It changes our thinking, our choices, our beliefs, and ultimately changes our heart when it unites us with what we most value. Allan Kardec had questions, so many that much of his writing is in question and answer format. Kardec seems to think in questions. Questioning is the art of learning because questions focus our attention on what we want to know. Playwright Eugene Ionesco said, "It is not the answers that enlighten, but the question." Theoretical physicist Werner Heisenberg said, "What we observe is not nature itself, but nature exposed to our method of questioning." The writer and all-around smart guy Voltaire said, "Judge a man by his questions rather than his answers." And after all of our questions, Socrates tells us, "The only true wisdom is in knowing that you know nothing." We don't have to look too hard to see that people differ, and so we ask questions. Why is there so much variety among humans? What accounts for our physical differences? Why does a skill or a talent come easy to some? And what's the source of the difference in intelligence among us? These questions lead to others. Why are some born into poverty and others into prosperity? Why are some lives cut short through illness? Why are some born blind, speech and hearing impaired, and afflicted with terrible diseases, while others seem to enjoy every physical advantage? I'll admit it. The first time I heard that reincarnation can answer questions like this, I was stubborn. The answers didn't seem to require a belief in reincarnation. And it just added a lot of complexity where I was looking for simplicity. After all, humans are similar but not the same. And we think it's natural that people look, act, and think differently. That some die young or born without sight or came into this world with a congenital disorder could easily stem from the same reason that some are born short or smart or skinny. Our traits are a result of heredity, passed down through genetics, explained by natural selection and confirmed by our belief in evolution. And accidents happen. An unfortunate coincidence, a momentary distraction, being in the wrong place at the wrong time, natural disasters, and countless of other causes for misfortune could easily shorten or derail a life. Why couldn't these be the reason why everyone doesn't enjoy the same intelligence, similar abilities, and an equally long life? I might have been able to allow my natural, modern view to hold, except for some nagging thoughts. Where was the belief that I am more than just this body? What about the idea that my actions have consequences in this life and beyond? How did this belief help me to live a good life? And where was God? Where was my belief in a good God? How did that fit in this picture? After years of resistance and objections, I slowly admitted that reincarnation brought these strands together: a good God, our immortal soul, and our differences. Once I considered my belief in God, I had to look again at the reason why the circumstances of our lives differ. If our differences are caused by God's good design, then the idea that they're controlled by a mechanical force of nature couldn't hold. This left two possibilities. Either God planned or at least permitted our differences, or we, his creations, his co-creators, were the cause. If our differences are caused by God's willful pleasure, then he created some sighted and others blind, some clever and others dim, some weak and others strong, some gifted and others without talent. That didn't seem right. After all, even human manufacturers recall products that don't meet a certain standard of perfection. You would think that a perfect creator wouldn't intentionally create defective work. His work would reflect his own perfection. Yet we can insist that God is the source of our differences, and in that case, either God let chance choose our differences, or God plays favorites, giving advantages to some and denying them to others through some mystery of God's design that we can never solve. If the reason for our differences are hidden in God's mystery, then not only are our answers meaningless, but so are our questions. When life bewilders us, we can only take consolation in the idea, it's a mystery. If we can't get intelligible answers to our questions, then we can't be sure how to act or what is right. If everything is hidden in God's mystery, then we're left with a lot of unanswered questions and no direction. If instead we say our differences are a result of chance, then we have a God who doesn't show us what's good. Chance means that any outcome is just as likely as any other outcome. If I'm expected to live a good life and yet the outcome of my actions is the result of a flip of a coin, then it doesn't much matter which way I choose. So being good in a world of chance has no meaning and removes responsibility from our decisions. To live a meaningful life, one that has purpose, the basis of life cannot be chance or mystery. It rubs against our human nature to think that life is just a series of mysterious, meaningless acts. So if our differences aren't a result of chance or mystery or favoritism or materialism, where do they come from? Reincarnation offers an answer that satisfies and gives our life meaning and purpose. It uncovers the the law guiding or governing the conditions of our life. And that principle is the law of cause and consequence. This understanding has its roots deep in human history, and it's notable on how many points Spiritism and ancient religions agree. In the Hindu tradition, karma is a natural law in which every thought, emotion, and an act that we have eventually come back to the individual with equal effect. It is a self-correcting moral law which reveals our soul's power to create. It is a force where good actions lead to good results, and harmful actions lead to suffering and unhappiness. Karma is what governs the conditions of our life and our tendencies, but it is not determinism or fate. Karma sets the conditions of our life, but doesn't control our response to it or negate free will. Karma simply sets the stage on which we act. Buddhism teaches that karma is a natural law of cause and consequence, where our actions change our future, so that an action taken today can change our tomorrow. A Buddhist master said, if you want to know your past life, look at your present condition. If you want to know your future life, look at your present actions. Both Buddhism and Hinduism teach that a person's karma plays out over multiple incarnations, and we will be reborn as many times as necessary until we achieve divine union. Spiritism borrows a page from these ancient religions and reveals that the circumstances of our life, good or bad, can be traced back to actions in our past. We can't be certain what brought about our present circumstance, but logic tells us that our present conditions is a consequence of our past actions. The trials we face are a result of natural consequence and not a punishment for past deeds. Just as the happiness we experience is a result of natural consequences and not a reward for some good we've done. When we suffer because of a past wrongdoing, it doesn't mean we acted that way because human nature is bad. Rather, our existence started in ignorance. And we, in some ways, didn't recognize that what we were doing would produce a harmful action. We can blame or hate ourselves for our past wrongdoings, but if we give in to these feelings, it won't lead us out of ignorance. Self-hatred leads to self-punishment. I've done something wrong and I have to be punished. Not only does this deny the true source of our wrongdoing, which is our ignorance, but it uses guilt as a way to avoid facing the consequences of our actions. We can be proud and feel superior because of good deeds we've done, but we don't have to give in to these feelings either. Self-love leads to self-glorification, and we have to guard against using pride as a way of recognizing the limits of our understanding and our constant need to work against ignorance. Instead of self-hatred and self-glorification, we see that the trials and happiness that we experience are simply the working out of cause and consequence. This is how God reveals the love he has for his creatures. God has already forgiven our ignorance and blessed our wisdom, allowing us as many chances as we need for the consequences of our actions to work themselves out, leading us out of darkness and into a more fuller, loving life. We don't have to wait for our incarnation autopsy report to uncover the cause of our afflictions. We can spend a lot of time worrying about what we might have done and what others done to us, speculating on who the people in our lives might have been to us in the past. But if we accept God's generous gift that gives us new life, we can focus on the true work of this incarnation, to grow in love by forgiving and seeking forgiveness. Saint Francis took the words, "Forgive our trespasses as we forgive those who trespass against us," as the means out of his ignorance and towards love. Francis welcomed afflictions because he believed each one was an opportunity to forgive so that he could be forgiven of the unloving things he had done. Francis understood the law of cause and consequence and the goodness of a God who provided it as a means, as a pathway towards love. When we see cause and effect play itself out in the life of others, we should resist thinking that others deserve to suffer. Rather, we should see that their actions began in ignorance, and so our response is to be patient and generous to them, and in that way model the love that God shows to us when we suffer. When suffering is deep, we meet it with a love that's just as deep. Regardless of the kind of suffering, short life, illness, an accident, a reversal of fortune, a belief in reincarnation calls us to respond with a heart overflowing with forgiveness and compassion. The working out of cause and effect fills us with hope because it provides the consolation that ignorance and not evil causes suffering, and ignorance is curable. So how are reincarnation and cause and consequence affected? In God's good design, we experience many lives, admitting that our past actions caused our present conditions, and using our present life to work against ignorance, to seek forgiveness for past misdeeds, and thereby to come to know God's love. This requires a belief in an afterlife, that some aspect of us continues after the corporeal body dies. We call this aspect the immortal soul, and it is the soul that continues when life runs out. Without this belief, Jesus' teachings to live a good life hardly make any sense. If all of our actions are wiped away with our final breath, then why love our neighbor? Why work against selfishness and pride? Why not give in to every desire? Jesus tells us that life is larger than fulfilling our moment-to-moment needs, because the soul carries the weight of its actions as well as the fruits of its progress beyond this life. We have a natural desire to better ourselves, and this inspires us to improve our circumstances. The progress we make results from our work, which refines our intelligence and clarifies our virtues. Progress means change, but the amount of change we make in one life is pretty small. If each of us began as an intellectual blank slate at birth, our movement from an ignorant state to a moral one seems unbelievable. Our desire to improve, coupled with our belief in an immortal soul, gives meaning and purpose to the work we do against ignorance and towards the life of love that Jesus calls us to. Since we're given multiple incarnations, are there limits to the kind of body that we can be incarnated into? Should we believe in the ancient Greek concept of metempsychosis, where a spirit can return in a new body, animal or human? Can a spirit that once incarnated as a human be reborn as an insect? Some beliefs hold that a human spirit can be reborn as a non-human. For example, in the Hindu tradition, they believe that every living being has a soul and immortal life. insects, plants, and animals are different kinds of human beings. Since rebirth is controlled by karma, an extreme misconduct in one existence might require a spiritual setback in a future existence. And this correction is satisfied by incarnation into a non-human body. Since non-humans lack the consciousness, the self-awareness for self-improvement, spiritual growth is suspended and remains stationary until the karma is worn out. The belief that a human spirit could be reborn in an animal body has no place in Spiritist thought. Spiritism teaches that humans have an individualized spirit that constantly strives against ignorance and towards deeper levels of understanding. To do this work, the human spirit requires a material body specifically adapted to its nature. A human spirit enters into a new phase of its existence and has no way of returning to its former prior state, primitive state. As a result, a human being could no more be reborn as an animal than a butterfly could return to its larval state and become a caterpillar, or a frog become a toad, or even a human adult return to its mother's womb. The spirit has outgrown its need for those former types of existences because what was good for it then is no longer useful. But we are indebted to these ancient religions because among their errors are also truths. Like Jesus, Buddha spoke in parables so that the simple village people that he spoke to could understand his teachings. Buddha's fearful image of being reborn as an animal was not to be taken literally. He used it as a moral lesson to teach people to live as humans and not as animals for fear of being reborn as one. And while Spiritism has no use for the Hindu belief that we could be reborn as a bird, this belief calls us to respect all life forms. We are related to every living creature and therefore are in moral relation to everything that exists. Our moral life is defined by our conduct towards all of nature because all of nature is divine and therefore related to us. Reincarnation is based on a belief in a forelife as well as a future life. If this is true, why can't I remember my previous lives? If my present life is the sum of my previous existences, doesn't this forgetfulness put me at a disadvantage? After all, if I can't remember lessons I've learned, how could I be expected to act any differently from when I did before I learned those lessons? Our endless curiosity leads us to ask all sorts of questions, and those asked about previous lives may seem valuable. But once we admit that our past experiences are hidden or obscure, probing prior lives will not bring us any closer to the truth about this one. Often, our desire to know about past lives comes from idle curiosity, the desire to know just for the sake of knowing, and sidetracks us from the work of this life. The Buddha has a parable about this. Once a man was struck by a poison arrow, and his friends and family go to find a doctor who can remove it. If that man were to say, "I will not have that arrow removed until I know whether the man shot it was a priest or a prince or a merchant, his name, his family, what kind of bow he used, and whether the arrowhead was an ordinary one or one made of iron," that man would die before all these things were ever known to him. Buddha's parable tells us that what is important is to get rid of that arrow and not waste time trying to find out who shot it. If remembrance of the past were necessary, God, who knows our needs and provides for them, would surely have given us this ability. Could we imagine that God would refuse to give us something that we need or give us something that we don't need? Instead of remembrance of the past, what we do have is the voice of conscience and our instinctive tendencies to use for our betterment. Our conscience and our instinctive tendencies are our memory of the past. An instinctive tendency is an automatic attraction to some good or a gut-level rejection of something hurtful, an echo of the past that helps us steer us through life's hills and valleys. This echo is the voice of conscience, our natural capacity to use our reason to judge our choices. Our conscience develops as we use our reason, guided by the moral teachings of Jesus. So if we make our livelihood serving others, Jesus tells us, "He who humbles himself shall be exalted." If we live in conflict, war, or anger, we remain calm, recalling Jesus' words, "Blessed are the peacemakers, for they shall be called children of God." If we have adversaries, we reconcile with them, recalling Jesus' promise that if you forgive your brother when he sins against you, your heavenly Father will also forgive you. And if we lack material comforts, we remember Jesus telling us not to store up treasures for ourselves on earth, where worms and rust destroy and thieves break in and steal, but store for yourselves treasures in heaven, where worms and rust do not destroy and thieves do not break in and steal. For where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. This, then, is the logic of reincarnation. We are born from a good God, ignorant of Him, ourselves, and the created world. We are intelligent spirits, capable of understanding that our actions are bound by cause and consequence, and understanding this slowly erases ignorance. Our spirit incarnates, and when the material body dies, our spirit continues and is incarnated many times, and acquiring the experiences it needs to wipe away ignorance and become purified. Since change moves us from what is comfortable, an incarnation often has difficult trials, invitations to forgive and be forgiven, a process that moves us ever closer to the heart of God's love. Reincarnation is not only a belief that finds place in our rational thinking. It is a seed that must take root in the heart. I continue to struggle with my belief in reincarnation, not because I doubt its truth, but because of the difference it should make in how I live my life. To see how it touches every moment of my life, every decision I make, every word I speak, every thought I think. To respect my limitations as well as those of others. To be of service to the peoples whose lives touch mine. To constantly work against ignorance. To love deeply. To forgive always. Every reincarnation has a plan. To know that plan, you only have to look around you. Look at who are your parents, your relatives, spouse, children, friends, neighbors, the work you do, the place you live, the troubles that seem to follow you wherever you go, and the gifts that come as second nature. Look at these, and you will see the work that is cut out for you. We ignore this work when we create a fictitious life, a life that we hope for but don't have, one full of people we've never met, work that will never be given to us, opportunities that never materialize, and gifts that just exist as wishful thinking. Creating a fictitious life not only wastes the one we have, but it is a rejection of the very incarnation we need for our own good. when we place conditions on our happiness, when we can be happy only if things were different, we place restrictions on our will because we limit the choices that we can make. This turns our will into a hostage, demanding satisfaction from what we think we need for our own good before we'll set our will free. We make peace with our own life when we recognize that not only do we have everything that we need, but we live in an abundance of gifts for our use, to refine our understanding, to seek forgiveness, to make amends for past mistakes, and to bring beauty and harmony into the lives of ourselves and those of others. Just one more question. How does reincarnation give insight to the idea of divine justice? Human justice says that everyone is equal under the law. If God's justice were like this, then everyone would have the same abilities, intelligence, and opportunities. We know that this doesn't describe our life, so divine laws or divine justice must differ from human justice, but it can't be so different that we just throw up our hands and say we'll never understand divine justice. In Matthew's gospel, the first word of Jesus' ministry, the first word Jesus speaks is repent. With this word, Jesus asks us to change our thinking, recalculate our path, refocus, turn ourselves around. If divine justice was so different from the kind of justice that we know, what was it that Jesus was asking us to turn to? How could we understand laws so different from the ones that we know if ours didn't lack any hint of divine law? Divine and human laws differ, but not as day from night. They differ more in the way our drawing of a circle compares to a perfect circle. We can attempt to draw a perfect circle only because we have some idea of what a perfect circle should look like. The critical difference between divine and human justice, the reason that keeps us from drawing that perfect circle, is that divine justice cannot be separated from, God's justice cannot be separated from his mercy. God's justice is his mercy. God's mercy is his justice. St. Thomas Aquinas says that when we practice justice, mercy dies in our heart. And if we show mercy, justice is buried. God shows his justice and mercy by respecting our limitations, never asking us to go beyond our strength, giving us as many opportunities as we need to wipe away our ignorance and become purified. Whatever harm we do, God's justice is ready to forgive a sorrowful heart, and his justice does not punish. God could show his justice by preventing us from wrongdoing or even zap us out of existence. But instead, he shows the power of his mercy that brings good out of evil, or good out of our offenses, rather. The wrong that we do is in the end nothing, because God will bring good out of it. The logic of reincarnation is rooted in love. We are created from God's love, and therefore love is infused in our nature. From God comes the force of love which moves all things, and all things are moving towards God. St. Augustine meant this when he said to God, "Our hearts are restless until they rest in you." All things are moving towards God, not because we are powerless against his will, but because his love is attractive and draws us to that end that we could delay, but not avoid. We are co-creators in God's work of love. And when we contribute to the good, we experience God's justice and participate in the mercy he has for all of his creatures. We have the freedom to create And this brings us face to face with the demand of charity. When our wrongs are washed clean, when karma is worn out, all that's left will be charity. Our differences are basic to this creative love, and it is because of our limitations that we need each other and others need us. Reincarnation calls us to complete God's work of love, to see the goodness in each other, to take pleasure in the beauty of the created world, and to meet the truth that life continues. Thank you for your kind attention.